that is certainly some artwork, isn't it? Replicart is pretty mysterious. I can't find any information on why Taito decided to distribute it in a pencil case, or why it appears they hired a middle schooler to doodle in their notebook and then use that for the cover, and even the title Replicart seems kind of iffy. It's the name of the machine that you're driving, but it also seems like it was supposed to be replicate. Also, the word balloon on the cover seems to reverse who the hero and villains are. Like I said, you're driving the Replicart, but the person in the Replicart is saying Salandra Fire, and Salandra is the big dragon that he's fighting. And all of that is just the packaging. The game itself, well, it's Snake. The Snake game is one of the oldest style of video games, with the earliest known example of the genre being the arcade game Blockade. While the details change from game to game, the principle of the genre is that you're guiding yourself through the environment, steering a head around obstacles while a body grows behind you. Since your path resembles a snake, they're called snake games. A common variant of these is to have the snake grow over time. Rather than a permanent trail, the snake has a certain length, and collecting something causes that snake to grow a bit longer. The earliest known example of that is 1982's Snake Bite. And since a variation on this was on every computer with DOS 5.0 and greater, and another variation was included on every single Nokia phone for almost 10 years, this is the best known variety of the Snake game. And that's the type that Replicart is. Replicart was actually released on the MSX first, and that version was by Sony. The Sony game was pretty well received, and you'll note that it has a much better cover, so Taito licensed it to make this Famicom Disk System game. The plot of the game is that aliens are invading Japan, and only the Replicart craft can take them down. And to do that, it has to progress through 100 levels of collecting dots that will make it grow, and then advancing to the next arena. So Replicart is Snake with a few extra things attached to it. And while Snake is a basic game, everybody loves Snake. It's easy to get into, has enough action to carry people along. It's a nice game. So Replicart must be fun. Yeah, not really. Replicart definitely has its quirks, and I'll get into those, but there are two fundamental problems with it that make it kinda bad. The first one is just weird but not insurmountable. The controls are relative. In other words, you tap right to rotate right, and tap left to rotate left. You don't press up to turn up. It's needlessly confusing, and you are going to die to it when you accidentally turn into a wall and collide, rather than turn away. The other issue, and the one that actually breaks the game for me, is that about 1 in every 10 times, Replicart eats your input. You'll tap to turn, and then nothing happens. Regardless of anything else, that renders the game unplayable to me. As you're watching this footage, you'll notice sometimes where I make weird moves, or crash into something that I shouldn't, and that's probably because the game didn't respond to an input. There's very few greater sins that a game can commit than inconsistent controls, and that makes Replicart pretty bad. With those two big problems out of the way that the stages progress is that dots appear in random locations, and you very, very slowly drive your snake around the screen to collect those. Thanks to a slow response time for the controls, even when they do work, it's surprisingly difficult to adjust your position just one square, which is something you always need to do in a snake game. You lose a life if you collide with an obstacle, whether it's a wall, your own tail, or one of the monsters that appear in later stages. However, your head is the only part that can get hurt, so if you have to dodge a boss's attacks, then you just have to worry about the head. When it comes to collecting those dots on the stage, you are on a timer that's slowly drawing down at the top of the screen. Collect a dot to refill it and extend the length of your snake a bit. If that timer runs out, which is extremely hard to do unless the stage is really complicated, a bunch of extra dots explode out of the dot that was there. Those new dots also have to be eaten and move around a little bit. Once all the dots are eaten, a tiny 1-block wide passage opens on the left-hand wall. Any monsters on the stage also become much larger and start actively chasing after you, though if they collide with your body, they get stuck in place for a while. Steer Replicart through that gap in the wall, and then you do it all over again. You keep any extensions to Replicart between stages. The way it's reset is to die. So the better you're doing, the more you have to avoid your own tail. That said, the game is scaled so small, and the growth is so slow, that the body length never really became a factor for me while I was playing. It feels like you have to do about 10 stages without dying before you really start struggling with the length of the body, and you're going to have a hard time with that. After 10 levels, there's a boss, and here you've gained a weapon. Pressing the B button will let you fire. And this is a straightforward situation where you avoid the boss's attacks and shoot them until they're gone. After that, there's a bonus stage where you'll find panels. On regular stages, these panels can be hidden and don't appear until you run over them. And then once they have appeared, you have to run over them again, and once your tail passes over them that time, then they reveal a letter to tell you what they do. Panels could destroy all of the enemies on the screen, freeze them in place, or make you invincible. The most important ones shrink Replicart down until it's just 3 segments, and then another power-up can prevent Replicart from growing when you collect those dots. You can save your progress to the floppy, but you really only make progress after you clear a boss, so you could start on level 1, level 11, level 21, and so on. In case you hadn't noticed yet, Replicart the game is really, really slow. Every level is about 3 to 5 minutes long, and if you die during it, then you have to start that stage over from the beginning. Now I like Snake, but even if Replicart was a good version of Snake, that is a lot of time for this game. Japanese players don't seem to be really fond of the Disk System version of Replicart. Don't know why. On the other hand, people seem to really like the MSX version. In fact, reviewers at the time told people to play the computer version instead of the Disk System one. As I mentioned, I find Replicart to be nearly unplayable. It would be a weak Snake game if there weren't the other issues, but not responding to my inputs in an action game is totally unexcusable. Just break out one of the good versions of Snake instead.